Hannah Bligh buried her husband in a gown she had turned 3 times. At the funeral tea, a cousin lifted Hannah's sleeve and read it aloud to the room. Unpicked, reversed, blacked cheap. Hannah did not pull her arm back. She let them look. Then Augusta Pelham turned to a table of 19 mourners and said it plain. One can always tell a widow who dies her own grief. The room laughed, soft and low, and at the far end, a man nobody expected, a duke, at a tenant's funeral, set down his cup. He asked the room one quiet question about the black they were all wearing. We stop there, before the answer. If you believe respect is earned in silence, this story is for you. Subscribe before we go on. And comment which county you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let me take you back. Nethercot, Essex, the year is 1874. The place smells of coal smoke and wet wool, and something sharper underneath. Logwood, iron, the smell of black being made. Hannah Bligh's hands were stained to the wrist, not with grime, with her trade. She worked at Sowerby's dye yard, and she blacked other families' mourning for 2d a yard. When a great house lost a father, or a farm lost a mother, the cloth came to the yard in carts. Hannah dipped it. Hannah mordanted it. Hannah hung it to dry in long dark curtains that took the light out of a room. 2d a yard. Her hands never came clean. She was a widow's daughter, and now a widow herself. Her annuity was £16 a year. £16, you should hold that figure, because everything turns on it. A full set of new weeds, the proper gown, the proper crape, the veil, the gloves, cost £11 4 shillings at the Mourning Emporium up in London. £11 4. That was 8 months of Hannah's income. 8 months to dress correctly for one death. Thomas Bligh was that death. Her husband, a modest man, a gentleman farmer whose people had married upward and never let him forget the climb. He died in the spring, and by the law of the day, Hannah owed him a year and a day of first mourning. Deepest black. No shine, no trim, no colour anywhere on her body. A year and a day of black she could not afford to buy. So she made it. That is the whole of it, and that is the secret the room did not know. There is a thing people said in Nethercot, said it the way you say things you never stop to hear. A neighbour said it to Hannah's own table, the week Thomas died. Half the county's grief goes through Sowerby's yard to be blacked, some poor woman's hands. She said it and reached for the bread. Nobody looked up. Nobody counted the poor woman's hands sitting 3 feet away, folded, blue to the wrist. Keep that thought too. Who supplies this room its black? Nobody in the story ever asks. Not yet. Now watch her work, because you should see what she could do. The night before the funeral, Hannah sat with her own gown across her knees. It was good cloth once. It had faded at the shoulders and the cuffs, gone that tired brown that old black goes. A lesser woman would have worn it as it was, and hoped the church was dim. Hannah took a blade to the seams. She unpicked the whole gown, thread by thread, till it lay in flat pieces on the table. Then she turned each piece. The faded face went in. The dark inner face came out, and what the sun had bleached, she blacked again by hand. Logwood first, boiled down to a red-brown liquor. Then the iron. Iron mordant is the trick of it. Iron turns logwood from purple to true dead black, the black that eats light. She worked the cloth through, and she watched the colour take, and she knew to the minute when to lift it. Too long and it goes green. Too short and it goes grey. She never went green. She never went grey. By morning the gown was whole again. Reseamed. Reversed. Reblacked. From across a church you would call it new. But here is the cruelty of the trade. Any woman who knows it can read it too. A turned sleeve has a tell. The seam sits proud. The nap runs the wrong way. The black is a shade too flat where the new dye sat on old cloth. Hannah could read a turned gown across a full room in one glance, and so could every woman who would mock her the next day. They knew the signs because their own mothers had done it. In leaner years they'd since agreed to forget. The funeral came, and the Pelhams received. They sat Hannah below the salt. You may not know the phrase. The salt cellar marked the middle of a long table, the family and the honoured guests above it, the lesser folk below. They put the widow, the actual widow, the woman whose husband they had gathered to bury, at the low end, near the door, with the poor neighbours and the hired help. Hannah kept her gloves on at the table. Watch that, she kept her gloves on. Augusta Pelham was Thomas's cousin by marriage, and she meant to be the truest mourner in the house. She wore new crape, the real thing, 9 shillings a yard, still smelling of the shop. She swept down the table to where Hannah sat, and she took up Hannah's sleeve between 2 fingers, like a fishwife pricing a fish. Turned, she said. Look, unpicked, reversed and blacked cheap. She rubbed the cuff. Not exactly Black Peter Robinson's, is it? That was the name of the grand mourning warehouse in London, the one the fine people used. Black Peter Robinson's. Augusta said it to be sure the whole table felt the distance between that place and this sleeve. Hannah did not pull her arm away. She let it lie in Augusta's fingers. She let them all look. One can always tell a widow who dies her own grief, Augusta said, to all 19 of them. And the room laughed. Soft, low, the kind of laugh that is worse than a shout, because it means everyone agrees and nobody thinks it needs saying twice. Now the story goes quiet, because I want you to do a sum the room never did. Last season, Hannah blacked 40 yards of Pelham cloth at Sowerby's yard, 40 yards. For that whole order she was paid 6 shillings and 8 pence. 6 and 8 for 40 yards. Augusta's new sleeve, the one she wore to price Hannah's, that Crape cost 9 shillings the single yard. Do you see it? The mourners had come to bury Thomas Bligh wearing black that Hannah's own hands had made. The Pelham weeds, the good deep Pelham black they were so proud of, it came through Sowerby's yard. It came through her fingers. They were wearing her labour to laugh at her poverty. And the smell was in the room the whole time. Logwood clings. It sits in wool for months. If any one of them had thought to name what they were breathing, they'd have smelled the dye yard on their own shoulders. Nobody named it. You don't name the thing you've decided not to see. Then the weather did what the Pelhams would not. It intervened. The night before the funeral tea, the big gathering, the one where all this would come to a head, rain got into the household's fresh order. A whole bolt of ordered crape, meant for the pallbearers' armbands and hat lengths, took the wet and spoiled, ran and streaked and went useless, and the tea was hours off. Master Sowerby needed the black remade overnight. Fast, faultless, there was one pair of hands in the parish quick enough to do it right by candlelight. You already know whose. The order came to Hannah's door after dark. She did not send it back. She did not laugh, though God knows she'd earned a laugh of her own. She set the pot on. Logwood ironed the old motions. And by one candle, in the small hours, Hannah Bligh blacked the very bands and lengths that the mourners would wear the next day to price her sleeve and count her poverty out loud. She was asked nothing. She told nothing. She took no revenge. She simply did the work, and did it perfectly, because that was the one thing in her life that had never once let her down. The room's dignity was drying on her line, and not one soul under that fine roof knew whose hands had hung it there. The funeral tea began at 3 o'clock, with the Pelham house smelling of cold meats and hothouse lilies, and underneath it all, that other thing nobody named. Hannah arrived early enough to take the worst seat, which is what women in her position were expected to do, and she took it without a word said, below the salt, near the draught from the passage door, a chair slightly lower than the others, or perhaps it only seemed so. She settled her hands in her lap, gloved still, and she waited. The room filled up. Augusta Pelham presided at the head of the long table, in 40 yards of the deepest, most perfect black Hannah had ever produced. It draped without a crease. It absorbed the candlelight the way good mourning cloth should. Augusta wore it like a verdict she had written herself. Here is a woman who knows how to grieve. Here is a woman of feeling and standing. Here is a woman who would never black her own grief cheap and call it done. Around the table, the other mourners arranged themselves in their degrees of black. 3 cousins from the Chelmsford branch. 2 from the Pelham side at Writtle. A rector who had not known Thomas well and showed it in his small talk. 11 women total, 6 men, a young Pelham not yet 20 who kept looking at his cuffs as though surprised to find himself there. 19 mourners at the long table. And not one of them had thought to wonder, yet, how the pallbearers' bands had come so right on such short notice. The black was perfect. The bands lay with exactly the right weight and depth across the sleeves and hat brims of the men who had carried Thomas. Augusta had even praised them, quietly, to the rector. Said Sowerby's yard was reliable in a crisis. Hannah heard it from 3 seats down. She drank her tea. The cruelty that afternoon ran in cycles, and Augusta conducted it the way a woman of her type conducts most things, without ever quite making it a cruelty. It was all observation. Commentary. The gentle performance of a woman who cares so much about the proper expression of grief that she cannot help but notice when others fall short. She had been doing it, on and off, since the burial that morning, and the room had learned its rhythm. A pause would fall, Augusta would speak, the room would adjust. Then the rain came in the door on Lettice Ward's shoulders, and the afternoon changed its pitch. Lettice Ward stood in the doorway, with the weather still on her. Her crape had gone the wrong colour in the rain. That is what cheap black does. It weeps. The dye runs and leaves a brown tide line at the hem, and everyone in a room like that one knows exactly what it means. Augusta looked up. She did not rise. "I think," she said, "the servants' door might have been kinder to you, in this wet." The room went quiet in that particular way. Not shocked. Waiting, Lettice's hands were red at the knuckle. Her veil had slipped its pin and hung crooked over one ear, and she was too frightened to fix it in front of them. Hannah stood up. She did it quietly. No scrape of the chair. She crossed the small distance below the salt, and she took Lettice by the elbow the way you steady someone on ice. Then she drew off her own gloves. They were good gloves, blacked deep and even, soft from wear, the only fine thing she owned. She worked them onto Lettice's cold hands, finger by finger, and she reached up and set the veil back on its pin, and for one held second, her bare wrist showed above the tea things, blue-black to the bone, stained past washing. The mark of the dye vat worn like a burn. Nobody saw it but the viewer. Augusta was already looking away. The mourners were already resettling. Lettice sat where Hannah put her, warm-handed now, and Hannah went back to her seat below the salt, with her own hands bare on her lap. At the head of the table, a man set down his cup. He had not spoken all afternoon. He wore mourning of his own, fresh and very fine, and he had come to a tenant's funeral because the Blighs had farmed his land for 2 generations, and he thought it was owed. The Duke of Aldermere. He had lately buried a sister, and when his own house went into black, he had done an odd thing for a duke. He had gone to the dye yard himself. He had wanted to know who made a black that deep. He remembered a name in a ledger. He had been watching Augusta lift a widow's sleeve all afternoon, and now he had heard enough. "A question," he said, "if I may." The table turned to him. "We are all of us in mourning here." He looked round, mild as milk. "Handsome mourning. I have admired it. So tell me." He paused. "Who died yours?" Nobody answered. Augusta laughed first. She was good at recovering. "Your Grace has a philosopher's turn of mind. Who dies anyone's? Some yard, some hands. Does it signify?" "I find it does," the Duke said. "It came from Sowerby's," said the rector helpfully, glad to be useful. "The banns, at least. Mrs. Pelham said so this morning. Reliable in a crisis," she said. "Sowerby's." The Duke nodded slowly. Yes, that was the name I remembered. He looked down the long table, past the fine black, past the salt cellar, to the woman below it with the bare stained wrists. Then he looked back. Send for the ledger. Augusta's smile held, but it cost her something now. The ledger. Sowerby keeps his blacking ledger, every yard, every hand, every price. I have seen it. Send to the yard. I should like it read at this table. He sat. Since we are speaking of grief and its proper expression, let us have the accounts of it. Someone went. The room tried to talk over the weight and could not manage it. The rain kept on, and when the clerk came, a thin boy in a wet coat, holding a book too big for him, the Duke had it laid open on the cloth between the teacups and told him to read. The boy found the page. His finger shook. "Pelham," he read. "Mourning order, last season, 40 yards, best crape, blacked with logwood and iron mordant." He swallowed. 6 shillings and 8 pence. One hand. Augusta had gone still. "Whose hand?" the Duke asked. The boy ran his finger to the margin. "Bly," he said. "H. Bly." The word went round the table like cold water. Some of them did not understand it yet. Augusta did. Augusta had just spent an afternoon pricing a sleeve, and she understood it perfectly. "Go on," said the Duke. "You needn't stop at one." The boy went on. He read the next name, and the next. He read the Chelmsford cousins' weeds, blacked at 2d a yard, one hand H. Bly. He read the Rittle Pelhams. He read the young man's own coat-cloth, and the young man not yet 20 looked down at his cuffs as though they had turned into something else on his arms. Gown by gown, the boy went round that table and named the black on their backs back to a single pair of wrists. The same yard, the same 2d, the same hand. The room stopped laughing as it heard itself totted up, and then the boy reached the last entry the Duke had marked and read it lower than the rest. "Overnight order," he said. "Emergency, pallbearers' bands and hat lengths, remade after the rain spoiled the first. Blacked by candlelight, night before the tea." He looked up, and then down again. One hand, H. Bly. The bands were on the men's arms as he said it, still warm from the wearing. The Duke stood. He did not raise his voice. He never once raised it. He turned to Augusta, and he said, "Madam, this afternoon you lifted that woman's sleeve. You read it out. You priced her grief cheap, for the amusement of the table." Augusta's mouth opened. "You have priced a sleeve," the Duke said, "that she blacked with her own hands. Has she blacked yours?" He lifted his own cuff to the light. "Fine black, deep as a well. Has she blacked mine?" Every yard of grief in this room came off her line. "You have spent the day mocking the woman who dressed you for the grave." Silence, real silence, the kind that has weight. Augusta set down the sleeve she had been holding. She had it still, a fold of Hannah's turned crape between 2 fingers, and she let it go as though it had grown hot. She could not lift her eyes. This was a woman who had built her whole standing on knowing black from black, on reading a turned seam across a room, and she had read everything and understood nothing. The one provenance she could not see was the one on her own back. Down the table, a second cousin slid his chair back from the cloth. Just an inch, just enough to be no longer quite at the table. He looked at his own sleeve and could not stop looking. The rector said, "Good heavens," to no one, and meant it for once. And the youngest Pelham, the boy not yet 20, turned in his seat to the woman below the salt. He had laughed that afternoon. He had. And now he asked her, very carefully, as though the words might break. "What is your name?" "Your Christian name." "I don't. I find I never asked." Hannah looked at him. Her bare wrists were in her lap, and she did not hide them now. "Hannah," she said. That was all. Not a word of the ledger, not a word of the night she spent blacking their banns while they slept. She thanked them, then she thanked the room for coming to bury Thomas. She said he would have been glad of the turnout. And the humility of it, the plain, unarmed humility, did what no anger could have done. It crushed them where they sat. The Duke was still standing. He was not finished. Mrs. Bligh, he said it so the 19 of them heard it. My house is in mourning and will be a year yet. I have been buying my black through Sowerby's and paying Sowerby's price. I should rather buy it from the hand that makes it. He inclined his head to her, a duke, in a room of her husband's kin. I offer you the whole of my household's mourning. By open contract, at a fair wage, named and written and paid to you. In daylight, before these witnesses, so there can be no mistaking the terms. Hannah stood to answer him. Below the salt no longer. I'll black it, your grace, she said, and I'll black it well. I know you will, he said. I've seen your work. I'm wearing it. The rain had stopped by the time they left. It does that. It ruins what it means to ruin, and then it clears as if nothing happened. 6 months on, there is a gate in Nethercot with a name over it. Sowerby had the sense to see which way the wind sat, and the sense to keep the woman who was the reason. It is her yard now in all but the deed, and the deed is coming. Her name is on the board above the vats. Her hands are still blue-black to the wrist. That does not wash out. It was never going to. But she keeps her sleeves at her elbows while she works now, and she does not tuck the stain away when someone comes to the counter. It is not a thing to hide. It is a maker's mark. Lettice Ward keeps the gloves. She tried to give them back, and Hannah would not have them. And Augusta Pelham, Augusta sends her cloth to Hannah's yard now, like everyone else in the county who wants a black that holds. She signs the book in full. Augusta Pelham, so many yards, price agreed. She does not linger at the counter. She does not lift anyone's sleeve. She has learned, rather late, what a turned seam actually tells you, which is only this, that someone could not pay. It never told you a thing about their worth. It only ever told you their purse. That was the whole of it, in the end. A room full of people in the finest black in Essex, and they spent an afternoon judging a widow for the poverty of her grief, while they sat there dressed head to foot in her labour. She blacked the whole parish's mourning. She dressed the county to bury its dead. And she was the one woman forbidden to show her own, until a ledger was opened on a tea-table and read out loud by a boy in a wet coat. The woman who blacked everyone's grief was the last one allowed to grieve in black. They saw her at last. Not because she raised her voice. Because the record did. If a story like that stayed with you, comment the county you're watching from. I want to see how far Hannah's story travels.